Hi, thank you so much for joining me for part 5 of this series, I Want More. And we're going to be looking at more pleasure. And so with that, we're going to be discussing the unmentionable topic, sex. That's right. We're diving into it, and I can just feel the tension rising because students, hopefully you're watching this, parents, hopefully you're watching this with your students. But as you are, you might be like, ooh, this might be awkward. And so I want us all just to take a moment and breathe. This is going to be okay. We will get through this, and I hope that this will be an encouragement, as this is something that we all deal with and we all battle with. And so how we deal with it and how we battle it is so important, and it's good to talk for parents and students to talk to each other about this. So hopefully this will be a great way to be able to do that. But I'd like to start off by just saying that sex is not the problem. Sex is designed by God, and it's designed for us to enjoy. Even our desire for sex is not the problem. That's a good desire that God has given each and every one of us. But the problem comes in how we try to fulfill that desire, how we try to satisfy it. If we try to do that outside of God's timing, outside of God's ways, then we fall into lust and sexual sin. And so really the question is where is God's priority in your life? Is He the top priority? And Matthew 5:8 says this, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And so the question is God enough for you to live a pure life for? Is He enough for you to be pure for? And the answer for many of us who've given into lust and sexual sin has to be no. No, He wasn't. But He wasn't because we forgot. We forgot, and we think that sexual sin gives us more pleasure and lust gives us more pleasure than God. That God can't do as well as sexual sin. But that's completely false. It's not true. God, there's no competition with God. He can give us far more pleasure than sexual sin. And I hope to bring that out today by looking at the life of Moses. But when we give in to lust and sexual sin, it brings a tremendous amount of hurt into our lives. Guilt and shame tend to fester there, and it can destroy not only us, but the lives of other people. And so as we look at this passage in Hebrews chapter 11, I want us to see how Moses is going to be pointing us to gain more pleasure, get more pleasure by looking to Jesus for 3 results. Looking to Jesus for 3 results. And so what we're going to see first is how we can look to Jesus to define us. Look to Jesus to define us. And we see this in Matthew chapter 11, verse 24. It says, "By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin." And so we see this comparison here between Pharaoh's daughter being called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, or being called part of the people of God. And so being a son of Pharaoh's daughter, you would have been one of the most top 5 most powerful, richest, famous people in the world at this time. Egypt was the world power. There was no competition for them. They were it. And they were dominating the world and just growing and booming, wealth beyond imagination. And Moses was all a part of this. And as he grew up, I'm sure there was riches and fame and money and girls, probably all chasing after him because of that. I mean, he probably could have been the ugliest guy with pimples and zits and warts all over his face, and he still would have been the most eligible bachelor. Girls still would have been chasing him simply because of his position and who he was. And he could have been defined by Egypt and enjoyed all the pleasure that Egypt had to offer him. But Moses saw it and was like, yeah, it's not enough. This isn't enough for me. And even though he was one of the top people in the world at this time, that wasn't enough for him. Even being Pharaoh wouldn't have been enough for him. He needed more pleasure than what Egypt offered. He needed more. And so so often we we want to be defined by, we want simply to be wanted by somebody. We want to be accepted by somebody, maybe a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And what we desire most in our hearts and lives will come to define us. If Moses desired the pleasure and wealth and fame that Egypt could have provided, then he would have been defined as a son of Pharaoh's daughter. And that is all he would have been defined by. And so often we fall into this trap because what we want is we want to be accepted. We want to be loved by somebody. We want to be wanted. And so we give our lives over to someone else and they end up defining who we are. That is not at all what God desires for us. He wants to define us. And when Jesus defines us, it is so much better. So look to Jesus to define you. And we see that Moses chose to be part of the people of God. You know, the people of God at this time were slaves. If you would have looked between Egypt and the people of God, you would have seen, you would have probably said, Egypt has way more to offer. But Moses, by faith, in God's promises, realized that God had way more pleasure to offer him than Egypt, that there was absolutely no comparison. He knew that God was the greatest giver of joy and pleasure and life, and that is where he went to. And so it says in Romans 8:13 through 14, it says, "For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God." And so what we see there is like, if you want to put to death the deeds of the flesh, if you want to put sin in your life to death, if you want to kill it, get rid of it out of your life, you need to be defined by the Spirit of God. You need to be walking with the Spirit of God, and because if the Spirit of God is in you, then you are a child of God. And what's so important about that is being part of a child of God, being grouped in the children of God, is that you are actually in Christ. That is Jesus who is coming to define you. So your relationship with God is not based on yourself, but it's based on Jesus, that as close a relationship that Jesus has with his Father, you have with the Father. And God the Father doesn't look at you according to your mistakes or your accomplishments. He looks at you through Jesus Christ. And so when he sees you, he sees his perfect and holy children, which is so amazing. If you would go through Ephesians chapters 1 and 2 and just look at that and look about how we are in Christ and how that defines us, you'll see a couple things in there. Things like you are holy and blameless. You're chosen. You were redeemed and forgiven, that you are sealed with the Holy Spirit for eternity, that you were made alive with Christ, that you were seated with him in the high places, and that you are saved by the grace of God. You are his workmanship, created to do good work so that he's planned for you, and that you're a part of the family and citizenship and household of God and being built up into a temple with others. It's like, whoa! Your identity is so much better and greater and deeper because of Jesus Christ. And so look through, you are defined by him, which is the very best thing. When you look to Jesus, he comes to define you because you desire him most. And we also see to look to Jesus to fill us. It says that in verse 25, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. You know, sin's pleasures are fleeting. They run from you. You come to them and you can enjoy them, but for only a short amount of time. It is the here and now, but that is all you get. You only get to enjoy sinful pleasures in the present, because they escape and run from you, and they never last. What sin does bring, that does kind of linger and last, is the guilt and the shame. It is the consequences and the aftermath of destruction and hurt that it leaves not only in your own heart and life, but in the lives and hearts of other people around you. And so the thing that you desire for it to just go away and run from you ends up lingering. And the part that you hope to enjoy the most and just to fill you up leaves you and is nowhere to be found. And so Moses, it says that Moses saw being mistreated with the people of God as greater enjoyment and pleasure than the fleeting pleasures of sin. You know, he doesn't even compare the pleasures of God with the pleasures of sin. Like, there would be no competition with that. So he took the very worst part of being named a part of the people of God, the mistreatment of the people of God, and he compared it to the very best of sin and lust and sexual sin. And he said, okay, the very best of sin is like so much worse. It's not even pleasurable compared to, there's more joy, enjoyment being mistreated as in being a child of God than enjoying sin. See, Jesus says in John 15:11, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy might be complete. And so the joy that Jesus gives us, it completes us, it fills us, and it overflows us. It's like a waterfall that never ends. It will never dry out. It is not something that runs for you have to grasp and hold on to. It is something that fills you up in your joy so much you think you can't enjoy it more, and yet it keeps ever growing and becoming better. Look to Jesus to fill you. His fulfillment is so much better than the pleasures of sin that are fleeting and running. And so Moses shows us to first look to Jesus to define you and look to Jesus to fill you. Third thing that Moses helps us with is to look to Jesus to reward you. It says in verse 26 that he considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. And so you see that he says that he considered the reproach of Christ as greater wealth or greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. And so what we see is the reward is so much greater, and he considered it. Sin never wants you to consider. Lust, sexual sin, it doesn't want you to consider anything. It wants you to live in the here and now, in the moment. Because if you would think about the outcomes of sexual sin and giving into lust, you wouldn't do it. Like, it's not worth it. It's not. There's no enjoyment in it. There's no lasting joy in that. And so it's like, who would do that? Nobody. But we all give into it because we don't consider it. Moses, he stopped and considered. He considered, and he made a list of all the riches and wealth and treasures and rewards that God gives him. And then he compared that with the riches and rewards and pleasures and promises of sin and a sexual sin. And there was absolutely no competition. God's rewards are so much better. And he says that, the wealth, he considered the reproach of Christ. He looked and he suffered for Christ. And here's the thing, is that this word for Christ means Messiah. And Moses was a deliverer of God's people. He went ahead and he felt like he knew that God's purpose for him was to deliver Israel out of slavery. But when he tried to do it on his own, he failed dramatically. It was only when he was humbled and that God called him to go do it again. But when he went to go do it again, it was so different. He was simply a messenger for God. He told Pharaoh what God told him, let my people go. And then he stood back and watched God work, watch God deliver. And Moses realized something. He's not the deliverer. He's not the Messiah. He is a small Messiah, but there's a greater, better Messiah who's coming. And that Messiah, that deliverer, will deliver the people from a greater slavery, not just physical slavery, but slavery from our own sin. And will lead the people in a greater exodus into a greater promised land that will last forever with him. And so Moses saw that that this caused suffering, but even the suffering of Christ was greater wealth than the riches of Egypt. There was absolutely no comparison. And so I encourage you to make a list. One of the things you're going to be doing I encourage you to do in your discussion guide is to go through, and I have some passages there for you, and compare and contrast the promises and pleasures and rewards that God's offering you compared to the promises and pleasures of sin and the rewards that they offer to you. And consider those things. And it also says that he looked towards the reward. He's looking ahead to it. You know, in Colossians chapter 3, it says this, in the first 5 verses, it tells us that we've been raised up with Christ. And then it says, seek the things above where Christ is. Seek him, and then set your mind on things above, because Christ is going to return and appear. When he appears, we'll become like him. So there's this hope and expectation. So as we set our minds on Christ, and then it says this in verse 5, put to death, and then it lists all these sins. See, the way we put to death the sins of lust and sexual sin, or any sin in our lives, is by looking to Jesus, considering him, seeing him. And that is what Moses is calling us to do. Look to Jesus to define you. Look to Jesus to fill you. Look to Jesus to reward you. And as you do that, it will release the power of lust and sexual sin in your life. Is God enough? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Is he enough for you to live a pure life for? And I hope that you come to the realization, yes, he is. He's more than enough. But whether you actually live a pure life will depend on whether you live for a greater pleasure that only God can satisfy and offer you, or if you're going to settle for a far lesser pleasure that was running from you and you can't hold on to, that will bring a lot of guilt and shame and regret. And I hope that you choose purity and you live a pure life by looking to Jesus. Because living by faith means that you look to Jesus Christ, that you look away from lust, that you look away from something, you look towards Jesus. The phrase that we see there in Hebrews 11, that Moses was looking to the reward. It's actually oddly worded in the Greek. It says to look away from to. To look away to. And it's like, that's a weird way to say that. But the point of that is that we need, in order to look to Jesus, we have to look away. You can't look at lust and look at Jesus. You can't hold and look at both at the same time. It's one or the other. And so it's saying, look away in order to look towards. And the way we fight sin and lust and sexual sin in our lives is by looking to Jesus. Look to him for what he's doing in your life and promising you that he will define you, that he will fill you, and that he will reward you. Look to Jesus. And so I hope that this has been an encouragement to you, parents and students, as we look to Jesus Christ. And so please go through that discussion guide together. And I hope that it's done in a way, and I think it is, that it won't be too awkward, but it will allow you guys to be able to talk with these things with relative ease. So enjoy it, have fun, and hopefully we'll see each other soon again. Praying for you guys. Have a great day.